I'll bring it up later.
Thank you very much for inviting me here, and thanks all for coming this morning. I am the MP for Islington North, which includes this campus, and I'm very proud to be the MP for Islington North, and have been since 1983. And I see that as my responsibility to represent the people of this community and to work with all communities and organisations in this area. And that means having a good and close working relationship with this university, because we have massive social issues that we have to face within this community. When I first came to London from Shropshire, I came on a truck, and the guy who was driving the truck said, "Do you want to get out here?" I said, "Why here?" He said, "It's Holloway Road." I said, "All right, why not?" So I got out, so I got out on Holloway Road, and I've remained here ever since. And it's an area I'm very proud to represent. My background, as kindly pointed out, was that I was a trade union organiser for the National Union of Public Employees, which is now part of Unison, representing school cleaners, school meals workers and school catering workers, as well as a number of people in the health service as well, in this area and indeed all over London. And I was a councillor in Haringey, a neighbouring borough, for 10 years, and my passion there was being chair of community development and investing in building of community centres and supporting community organisations, because London, like many other cities, has a massive population turnover, which in some ways can be good and can be creative in a community, but also leads to a lot of isolation and dislocation as well. And so investing in the needs of communities and supporting community development is a very important part, in my view, of social policy. This community has rich and poor living alongside. I mean, within 5 minutes walk of this college, you could go up to Highbury Fields and see houses that would be on the market for several millions of pounds. You could walk slightly in the other direction, just past the stadium, to Harvest Estate, and you will find a mixture of people living there, some of whom are really up against it, dealing with universal credit, immigration issues, refugee issues, and sheer levels of poverty. 40% of the children in this area are in relative poverty, and that is as high as you'll find almost anywhere in the country, although the image of the area is one of middle class aspiration. That is not really a very accurate reflection of what the community as a whole is about. And so I'm very proud to represent that diversity, and my passion is on the housing situation facing us locally. A third, roughly, of the community live in the private rented sector. Therefore, it's insecure. Therefore, it is very expensive. And the local housing allowance is not sufficient for most of the private rented sector. And my office, and Alejandra and Tom from my office here today, and they'll attest to this, is that people who need somewhere to live, the council does not have sufficient council housing, although it is building as much as it can. I'm not critical of the council on this matter. They're put in the private rented sector. It's too expensive locally, so they get moved out of the borough, a long distance away. The children don't want to lose that sense of community of a local primary school, so they're making often massive journeys to get from where they've been put in private rented in Barking or Edmonton, Enfield, sometimes even further afield than that, in order to maintain that position at the local community of a school. And it's wrong and it's cruel on those children. A child that is living in an overcrowded private rented place with no security, maybe moving every year, 2 years somewhere else, doesn't build up that sense of community, solidarity and friendship that other children do. automatically almost. They underachieve in school and the problems go on all the way through. If London is to be the successful, diverse city we want it to be, there's got to be regulation of the private rented sector, there's got to be security of living, and there's got to be a reduction in housing costs, particularly in the private rented sector, and that's what I'm absolutely determined to do. And all of that was included in our manifesto in the general election. I know obviously we didn't win the general election, I know that more than anybody else, but I tell you what, we're never giving up on that strategy, never giving up on those policies. So I hope as students in this university you'll do all you can obviously to achieve in the university, please do, but also give what help and support you can to the local community as volunteers and participants and so on, because that is really what further and higher education should be about learning what you can give to a community as well as what you can receive from a community. And I'll stop now, otherwise I'll go on forever and you'll get bored stiff. And I'll start taking your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Corbyn. So first we'll be going through the preset questions. And the first question will be coming from Tawfiq.
Good morning. So what policy of the 2019 manifesto are you most proud of?
Did you all hear the question?
Yeah.
Policy most proud of in the manifesto. It's hard to pick out any one policy from it, because if I just explain the process of policy making, it's very difficult in a party of now 600,000 members and 3 million affiliated members to get every policy into a manifesto and to get everything sort of squared off and matched up with the funding that's available. And so what we did was looked at all the can I get a glass of water, by the way? I'm going a bit dry, thank you very much. We looked through all the policies that have been passed by conference of existing party policy, and we looked at how we developed the narrative of them. And the fundamentals of both the 2015 and 2017 manifesto were of anti-austerity, were of investment in the future, and dealing with the crying levels of both regional and financial inequality in this country. And that was the fundamental to it was anti-austerity, and working with parties in other countries that are also fighting austerity and looking towards an investment-led economy. So we've built up good relations with socialist and left parties in Spain and Portugal and many other countries across Europe. So fundamentally what I'd say is I'm very proud of that aspect of it. The writing of the manifesto is obviously, thank you very much, is obviously a very difficult process. Andrew Fisher, who is our director of policy, wrote the manifesto, and he would then send it to various members of the shadow cabinet team and say, you've got this section on, for example, green industrial revolution, you've got to do it in 500 words. You're probably familiar with this process. They would then send back 2,000 words, and he'd say, no, 500 by tomorrow, please. And it's a very, very intense process, because the election campaign has already begun, and I'm getting to sign off bits of the manifesto by text messaging and emails and stuff on trains all over the country. So it's very intense and quite complicated, and it reads surprisingly well for a document that was put together in incredible speed, but with a great deal of skill by him and others. So I'm proud of the fundamentals of the manifesto, which is the anti-austerity part of it. The innovative parts, in my view, are the green industrial revolution, because the green industrial revolution is about uniting environmental activists who tend to be young and very conscious of environmental issues. I mean, we're alongside one of the most polluting roads in London, for example, and it's real for a lot of people. But it's also got to appeal to people who are concerned about their community, their town, their industry, and their job. and don't want to feel under threat from environmental regulations which may shut down their industry or damage the economy of their town. It's got to be real for everybody. And so over all of last year, I was attending environmental roundtables at towns and cities all over the country. One of the most interesting ones I went to was in Blackpool. Now, Blackpool is a resort town. It's also an industrial town. In the past, it's made planes and cars and lots of things, and there's quite a big industrial base to Blackpool. There's also the issue of fracking in Lancashire, just to the east of Blackpool. And so the environmental round table was huge. We had it in about 20 or 30 tables around the room. It was absolutely fascinating because we were saying to people, what would you do to make Blackpool a more sustainable town? And so what do you do about transport? What do you do about the number of people coming to Blackpool by car because of the inadequacy and the cost of the train service? What do you do about the industries that are here? What do you do about fracking and what it's doing? And what do you do about energy consumption in the place? And what do you do about food waste? And what do you do about poverty? Because it is also one of the poorest places in the country, with a very large number of people with challenging mental health conditions trying to get accommodation in Blackpool in the winter months, as well as quite a lot of people rough sleeping. And so it became a discussion about social justice as well as that. And so our whole green industrial revolution idea, just like the Green New Deal in the USA, is designed to bring people and communities together. Because if we don't, as a society, develop environmentally sustainable policies that get us to net zero very quickly, then the extraordinary weather patterns we've seen in this country over the last few months, few years, are going to get more intense and worse. And it's Europe and North America that, to some extent, have the infrastructure to deal with it. Put it this way. Massive floods in Shropshire all down the Severn Valley over the past week. I come from that area. I know it very well and I feel for the people there. We do have a fire and rescue service, we do have an environmental agency and so on that can do something to ameliorate the effects of those floods. When the floods happened in Mozambique last year, for some communities it was 3 weeks before anybody arrived with either food or medicine or relief or support of any way. They simply didn't have the infrastructure to deal with it. Has Mozambique been the cause of global warming? Has industrial development in Mozambique been the one that's damaged our environment? Obviously you know the answer as well as I do to that, so it has to be global. Therefore this year's COP26 in Glasgow in November is a very, very important thing, and I'll be spending a lot of time campaigning on all of this over the summer and keep on taking the issue to the government, because the environmental crisis has to be met, but it also has to be met by the inequality crisis that exists both in this country and around the world as well. Thank you for your question.
Thank you for that very detailed answer.
You mean it was too long?
No, it was actually quite detailed. It was really insightful as well. It's perfect. So, great, thank you for that insight. The second question we're going from is from Aisha Topping. Is she in the room? Okay, so I'm going to be, I'll say the question for you. What were the 2 challenges you faced through your journey to becoming a politician, and how have they shaped you into the politician you are today?
Well, I never set out in life to be a politician. I didn't wake up one morning in rural Shropshire and decide, yes, yes, I know where my destiny lies. There never was one of those moments. And so I grew up in a very small rural environment, which was a beautiful place in many ways, but also a very unequal and very unjust place in many ways. Rural poverty is as bad as urban poverty, but doesn't look the same. And so I got involved in lots of issues and campaigns. This was 1960s, and I got involved in opposing the Vietnam War and the peace movement surrounding that. And my ideas developed to some extent at school. I was actually the most monumentally unsuccessful student in school, mainly because I wasn't terribly interested in the exam questions. I was more interested in the subject. So you give me an exam with 5 questions. I thought the first question was really interesting, so I'd write a very long answer to the first question, but that would mean the other 4 got ignored, which is not a great way of passing an exam, actually. I don't advise any of you to do that. But I was more interested in the subjects than that. And then when I left school, I went to the Caribbean, to Jamaica, for two years as a volunteer for VSO, and teaching and youth work and helping and supporting children who were victims of polio when I was there. And so that taught me a great deal and gave me a thirst for history, particularly the history of the Caribbean and black history, which I've remained very interested in and spend a lot of time on. And then eventually I came back to this country. I was briefly a student in this wonderful institution, but we didn't kind of get along, so we parted company, but I'm back here now, if that's okay. I got very involved in local activities and union activities. I worked firstly for the Tailors and Garment Workers Union, which grew out of the Jewish Tailors Union in the East End of London, and then went on to become an organiser for the National Union of Public Employees, I was saying, dealing with school meals and so on, and then became involved in local politics in Haringey and was elected to the council in 1974 for Stroud Green area just next to Finsbury Park. And then 9 years later, Islington North Labour Party was going through a crisis because its MP had joined another party, the Social Democratic Party, and they were looking for a new candidate, and a number of members invited me to put my name forward, which I did. We had a selection process that went on for 6 months. I remember it very well, and I was eventually narrowly selected, and I've been elected the MP for Islington North ever since. And so I didn't set out in life to do this, and my whole purpose is about encouraging and strengthening people and trying to empower people and address issues of inequality and poverty. And so in Parliament I've tried to represent all of those issues, and then you know about 2015 and the leadership of the party, which we won, and I'm proud to say that Labour Party membership went up from 200,000 in 2015 to 600,000 today, and I'm very proud of that achievement and of the achievement of the policy changes that we've made in the party. So I'm not disappearing, I'm not going away, and I've just been talking to your colleagues in the university and the Vice-Chancellor this morning about things we can do together in the future on human rights, on environmental issues, and on local issues surrounding social justice and equality. And really being a publicly elected representative is an enormous honour and enormous responsibility, and I enjoy and love representing the area in which I live in and have lived in for a very long time. It gives one a sense of place, and so you go out in the morning and the first question to somebody is, "Morning, how are you? By the way, can you get me an answer of my housing query we sent you last week?" And that is real life, day-to-day accountability, and that is a good thing. That's how politics ought to be. So that's my purpose in life, and I will carry on doing that. Thank you.
Before going on to my third question, I just want to let you know, and I hope you're proud of this, that London Metropolitan University is quite progressive in regards to sustainability and becoming an extremely green university. Our aim is to become the most sustainable and green university throughout the whole of the UK, and I think all students should be proud of that, and also the community itself.
Good.
And I have to say that the Student Union is at the forefront of ensuring that we're sustainable in every regard possible. So, for our third question, it's from Matthew Babb. Is he here today? Awesome. Yeah, microphone's just coming to you. Here you go, sir.
I think you kind of already answered the first bit of my question, because it was really what inspired you to get into politics, but there was a second part asking what advice would you give to those who want to follow in your footsteps and go down the same path?
If somebody wants to be an elected representative at any level, student, council, parliament, whatever it happens to be, ask yourself the question, why do you want to do it? Ask yourself a very hard question, why do I want to do that? Is it for the glory? Is it for that great moment when you're actually declared elected? Or is it what you're going to do as a representative and how you will empower others in that process? And so when, I remember at one university I went to, this is some years ago before I became leader of the party, the young man comes up to me at the end and he said, "Mr. Corbyn, I need to be in the House." I said, "What House?" And he said, "The House." I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "The House of Commons." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I think I ought to be." Wow. He said, "What do you think I should do?" I said, "Go away, get involved in a campaign, challenge homelessness, challenge inequality and challenge poverty, then decide if you are fit to be a representative of the people before you put yourself forward for that position." And so my view of democracy is that you have to be accountable for what you do. It's not easy. It's very tough sometimes, and sometimes there are quite difficult decisions to be made. Do you represent the belief in what the popular view is of the area you've been elected for, or do you represent where you have a passionate view of your own? I remember this in the early 80s when Margaret Thatcher wanted to restore the death penalty in Britain. Good answer, whoever that was. If we'd done a poll of any community in the country, then there would probably have been a majority to restore the death penalty, probably. My view was there were no circumstances ever, anywhere, any time I would vote to restore the death penalty for anybody, for anything. I just think it's wrong, morally wrong, and I wouldn't do it. So people said, "What you can do?" I said, "I'm going to vote against it." They said, "What if we don't agree with you?" I said, "Well, then you're perfectly free to remove me at a later stage for doing that, but I will never vote for it. End of story." And so that was my position. And so that issue, fortunately, hardly ever comes up now. But there are times when you've got to make a stand on what you believe in, and be prepared to take the consequences of it as well. And likewise, when issues come up about Iraq war and so on, as far as I was concerned, there was no way I was ever going to vote for that. And I told the people in the Parliamentary Labour Party and Tony Blair that I'm sorry, there's no circumstance in which I will support this policy. I'm sorry, but that's the end of it. I'm not open to persuasion on this matter. And Tony Blair, to his credit, said, "I never thought I could persuade you anyway." So I said, "Well, let's not waste any more time trying, shall we?" And so, yeah, you've got to be prepared to stick to what you believe in, but also to represent people, however obvious their problem is or not obvious, because people will come and see you if you're an elected representative, be it on a student body, be it council, MP or anything, who are often up against it, not particularly articulate. They'll come and talk to you about one problem, and then you'll look at them and say, "Well, actually you're worried about something else." And you've got to have an ability to listen to people and try and be intuitive about what their problem really is. And women who've been victims of rape, either in this country or as an act of war or torture in other parts of the world, often do not want to talk about it for very obvious reasons, particularly to a man. And so you've got to recognize that and make arrangements for them to be able to talk in a different way, to get the therapeutic support, whatever else they need. But also, as an MP, remember you represent the entire community, whoever they are, whatever their views, you're still their MP, and you've got to give them the space and the time to talk to you. And that is very time consuming, and it's very easy to be sucked into the trappings of Westminster and the trappings of interesting, slightly exotic meetings and events and so on. That's not what you're there for. You've been sent there to hold government and executive to account. And one thing I was looking forward to doing as a Labour government was actually empowering Parliament to hold the government to account. People said to me, "You're mad. They're going to give you a really hard time." I said, that's what government is about, getting a hard time from Parliament. So when John Bercow, the previous Speaker, was prepared to suspend the relevant standing order to allow the House of Commons to decide the agenda during the debate about Brexit, he did a very brave thing, because actually what he did was empowered the House of Commons and didn't give the executive the power to decide the agenda. I know it sounds very obscure, but actually it was highly significant in political terms, and that is the sort of direction that I would want a democracy to go in. It doesn't make life easy, because you're still trying to achieve things at the same time, but that's what democracy should be about, the empowerment of people. And so if you're looking to go into politics, all the very best, but make sure you're doing it for the right motives. Thank you for your question.
So I've just been told that we're running short of time, so I'm going to quickly jump to the next question from Claire Ismeni. Currently she's not here, so I'll ask the question.
How come she hasn't come then? What's going on?
Lectures. What are your plans after you step down from being head of the party?
Thank you very much. The new leader will be elected on April the 4th. And until then, I'm doing a lot of campaigns and visits around the country, and making sure that the party does hold the government to account in Parliament on their trade negotiations with the USA and with the European Union, and the obvious contradiction between protecting rights, environmental protections and conditions that we've got through European Union membership, with Donald Trump's wish to remove them all and take over our public services. I'm trying to persuade Boris Johnson there is a bit of a difference of opinion here between the two courses that he's trying to adopt. He doesn't quite see it that way yet, but I'm trying to educate him. There's always somebody that needs a bit of education. And so I'm doing that, and making sure the shadow cabinet do hold the government to account. So big issues coming up like the BBC licence and BBC charter. Tracy Brabin is working very hard on that as our shadow culture minister. John McDonnell is preparing the alternative budget we'll produce on the 11th of March. And the Green New Deal issues, Green Industrial Revolution, we're working very hard on, and also visiting the areas that have been badly flooded. And I'm doing a lot of travelling around the country. I was in Coventry yesterday, in Wales last week, and so on. After April the 4th, I obviously will not be the leader of the party. I will be very active and concentrating on obviously being the local MP, which I've never neglected, if I may say so, but also I'll be concentrating on human rights and environmental issues. I was previously an officer of the All-Party Parliamentary Human Rights Group, and have taken up the causes of numbers of people around the world, Dalit Solidarity Campaign, Chagos Islanders, Western Sahara, and a number of other places around the world, and we'll be taking up and supporting the Rohingya people and Uyghur people in the issues they face. And I'll be going to the UN Human Rights Council in June with a number of people and organisations then. So that'll be a lot of what I'll be doing, and as I indicated earlier, a lot of work on environmental issues. So I'll be as busy as I've always been. It won't be much different in that sense, but obviously in a different position. I'm proud of the policy changes we've made. I'm very sad at the election result. At the end of the day, Brexit was a chasm that was too big to bridge. The party came to a position of supporting a second referendum after negotiation. I put that forward in the election, which was that we'd negotiate a trade deal with the EU and put that alongside Remain in a referendum. Ultimately, we we didn't win the election, and I am obviously very sad about that, and I take my responsibility for that as well. But I would also say, and I think this has to be dealt with, the issue of the way in which mainstream media deal with politics in this country has to be addressed. We've had 5 years of unremitting attack and abuse of individuals in the party, me included. And in the last week of the election campaign, according to studies done by a number of universities, Loughborough, Goldsmiths, Birkbeck and Glasgow School of Media Studies, indicate that 97% of mainstream media coverage of the election in the last week, which is the most intense period when people are focused on the election, was either abusive or hostile to Labour. That cannot be fair or right in a democratic society, and we did our best to reach across that. The interesting facts of this are that in the demography of Labour voting is very strong amongst under 25s, under 35s, under 40-year-olds. It rapidly reduces in later years, and at the same time the readership and access to mainstream media increases with the age profile. So you can see a direct correlation between those that rely on social media for their information and those that rely on mainstream media for their information, between support for Labour or not support for Labour. Now, obviously we've got to be better and more effective at dealing with mainstream media. I fully understand that, but I also think we have to ask questions about the democracy of media ownership, the democracy of access to the media, and democracy of the right to know. And the other last point I make on this is it's an uncomfortable question that, I mean, all of us in this room, I'm sure, use mobile phones and use computers and we get our information, but to some extent we self-select where it's coming from. We go onto websites that we basically agree with. We get ourselves into an echo chamber of people that we fundamentally agree with, and then end up supporting each other, and it becomes a sort of a series of silos of self-justification and agreement across the piece. That is actually not healthy in a democracy. You should be exposed to other arguments. You should be exposed to challenges. You should be exposed to debate. I don't have a simple answer to this, but I think it's something that has really got to be thought about quite a lot, because otherwise, in an era when it's never been easier to access information and ideas, it's never been easier to find out anything anywhere around the world. I mean, you can go on your mobile phone and immediately find some obscure piece of information which 10, 20 years ago you'd have had to go to a library and spend hours looking through books to get it. You can do it straight away. Yet we end up being less informed as a result of it. I don't have a simple answer to this, but it is about opening up the consciousness of encouraging young people in school as well as university to learn for themselves and explore for themselves. I'm going on to a school after this, a Newington Green school, and I'm really impressed by what I've seen of what they've done. They don't teach the children about environment. They say to them, find out about the environment, and they find out for themselves. When you've found something out for yourselves, and you've come to that conclusion yourself, you're much more convinced of it than if you've simply been told what to think. And so it is about opening up the brilliance of the human mind to explore for ideas, and that surely is what this place and all these schools are really about.
Thank you, Mr. Corbyn. So for our next question, which is from Omkar, I'll just give it the mic.
You're taking over somebody else's job here.
This is for you. I forgot there was only 2 mics.
One job.
You see, we've protected your job.
My question to you is, do you believe there's a barrier between the government and the people? And if so, what it is?
A barrier?
Yeah.
Yes, there is inevitably a barrier between government and people. The barrier is on knowledge, the barrier is on power, and the barrier is the exclusivity of that power surrounding government and the relationships with government. And so How do we deal with that? You empower people through democratic accountability, which comes partly through Parliament, but an election isn't the only form of accountability. There's the accountability of the access of journalists, of media, to power and what they do and speak up on behalf of people. There's also the democracy of what actions people take, and in order to try and change opinion. So I've been fascinated watching what's going on in India at the moment with the debate about the citizenship bill that's going through, and sadly the violence that's come as a result of it, which I hope ends. So that barrier is there. How do you overcome it? Democracy, accountability, but also openness. There is a massive power of very big business and unaccountable lobbying that doesn't just happen at a national government level. If you go to the United Nations in New York or anywhere else, you'll find, as in the European Union, you'll find a massive transnational power of lobbying by very big businesses and corporations. And you'll find poorer countries in the world actually have very few choices in what they can do. They rely on trade relationships, which can be massively beneficial or the opposite, and they rely on the largesse or otherwise of very big corporations to invest or not in their society and their country. And so whilst we pride ourselves on accountability and democracy at a national level and a government level, what we forget is that many of these corporations work on a totally global or international level, which is why our manifesto began to explore in that direction the questions of tax havens, tax write-offs, tax avoidance, and the way in which big businesses can apparently sell vast amounts of coffee in Luxembourg, quite unattainable amounts of coffee, in order to be charged a very low rate of taxation compared to somewhere else. There's plenty of other examples of that. So issues of justice around the world are key to it. That barrier is absolutely there. And I don't underestimate the difficulties or problems of being in government, of what you're trying to achieve when you're trying to bring about social justice for the people that represent you, and also try and bring about greater social justice around the world. I recognise that all of those problems, at the end of the day, you only achieve change if you've got popular support in doing so, and that is the important part of it. So an educated population that understands the reality of that power is very, very important. Thank you for your question.
So for our next and last preset question, which is from Marjan Jedi. Sorry.
Good morning, Mr. Corbyn. Thank you for giving your time to be here this morning. So my question is, what economical effects do you foresee Brexit will have in the next few years?
Economic effect of Brexit. There are huge issues surrounding it, massive. I'm not quite sure in which direction the trade negotiations are going to go, any more than I suspect you are either. If we have a effective trade relationship with Europe, which we have to have, then the European Union is saying that Britain must not become an undercutting country on the fringes of Europe, i.e. removing environmental, consumer and other protections in order to have a trade relationship with Europe. And an awful lot of manufacturing industry in Britain relies on just-in-time delivery from the EU. The northeast of England is the one region of the country that has a manufacturing surplus in trade. Nissan and other manufacturing units across the northeast rely on day-to-day imports from the European Union, as do Jaguar Land Rover and others. If those supply chains are subject to customs checks, then they simply won't work. because it has to be done very, very quickly. That's the whole way in which it works. And so that trade relationship with Europe is absolutely central to this. The government seems to believe that it's going to get some kind of accommodated trade relationship with the United States. The US price will be a change in food standards, a change in environmental regulations, and the importation of food products from the USA, particularly, I suspect, GM crops, which are completely illegal within the European Union. So you can see a whole lot of areas where there's going to be an immediate problem. And so unless there is a fairly rapid agreement on a trade relationship with Europe, then I see a huge economic problem coming up probably around September, October time, towards the end of the period when the government is supposed to be negotiating a trade deal with Europe. And so that's why we thought very, very carefully about all this before the election. And whilst we were in a position to negotiate a trade agreement with the European Union, which would have been something that protected those conditions and would have maintained that trade relationship and the relationship of people between this country and Europe. And I do think we should ensure that every person with settled status is allowed to remain permanently in this country and to bring their families here as well, and give full civil rights to everybody that's living in this country, because there is, to my view, a sort of nasty tinge of xenophobia creeping into this debate at the present time. I don't want to live in a country that's dominated by those kind of thoughts and xenophobes. So yeah, there are really serious concerns, and we will be pushing very hard to maintain that trade relationship in the future, because if we don't, then there's going to be huge problems in this country. Thank you for your question. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Corbyn, for coming to visit London Metropolitan University and also for giving your time to answer students' questions. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have with Mr. Corbyn.
But I will come back.
You will come back. I do want to say at this moment in time, we are talking about politics, and in one of Mr. Corbyn's answers, he did say to get involved. So I just want to point out that the student union elections are going on. Please do vote on March 2nd, and voting will end on the March of 6th. So please do get involved. There's the presidential elections happening, but also sabbatical officers, part-time and full-time.
Got to just say thanks very much, and I know we've got to finish now, but I'm very happy to come back and work with the student body and the university, because there's a whole lot of local issues that we can work together on, and I would urge you all to, whilst you're at London Met as students, be as involved as you can with our local community, so we build that close relationship between our local community and this university, and inspire children in our primary schools and secondary schools to realise that university, good quality apprenticeships and so on is absolutely for them. Raise the sights and raise the aspirations of young people. So let's build a society that's fit for the next generation. Thank you. Elections are important, just make sure you vote.